Okay, good morning and welcome to our panel discussion this morning entitled Building a Collaborative Protein Research Ecosystem. So we're very lucky to be joined by four panelists who are going to give us some of their thoughts around this topic this morning. So I'd like to welcome Dennis Chareau, who is CEO of Improve Iter Piver France. Dennis, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. After a career in the food industry, producing enzymes and working in the starch industry for 30 years, I started Improve 9 years ago. Improve is an R&D center, expert in plant-based protein. We can simulate processes, we can do a lot of analysis, and we can serve our customers. We have more than 500 customers worldwide to develop new products, new processes in order to really generate new ideas around the plant-based protein sector. I'm also CEO of Piver, which is an R&D center, expert in biotechnologies and green chemistry, and also managing director of ITERG, which is expert in oilseed processing and oleochemistry.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're just going to have a bit of a conversation around the area of this protein research ecosystem. And in your opinion, what are the barriers that are experienced by academic institutions and the research community in collaborating with industry on a protein research ecosystem? And what do you think is required for the research institutions to better align their programs with market and industry needs?
I think the main issue is timing, because the main focus of academic world is to make very serious and fundamental R&D and potentially to discover new things and to publish. The main topic in the industry is to go fast, to be secret, confidential, and to keep as much as they can the IP to protect their own investment and business. And that's where sometimes there are some conflicts, timing conflicts and interest conflicts. And the way to really collaborate and develop a win-win situation is to integrate the academic world in the benefit of the discovery in order to associate. I have a few examples in mind that maybe there can be a master license agreement between the academic center and the industrial in order to reward the discovery and to motivate academic researcher to the benefit of their success.
So on that general theme, what model can enable industry and research institutions to collaborate on projects involving IP?
So as I said before, IP is one of the key elements, because IP is extremely important tool to protect innovation and to protect investment. In the plant-based protein world, investments are in millions and sometimes hundreds of millions euros or dollars. So it's a lot of money. And of course, this money needs to be protected. And IP is a very strong barrier to avoid competitors to enter in the game. This is why the management of this IP is so critical on both sides, for the industrial to protect its investment, but also for the academic to protect the innovation and any new ideas. And I think partnership can be based on a perfect understanding of the mechanism and a sharing of the benefit. Of course, most of the risk will be borne by the industrial, because they are investing a lot, as I said before. But a lot of time, industrial needs the innovating ideas coming from the academic world. This is why it's very possible to build a win-win situation.
So what do you think is the role of industry, research organizations, and government in sustaining a collaborative protein research ecosystem?
To feed innovation, industrial needs either to develop strong and very numerous teams of R&D internally, which is very expensive, or to benefit from an ecosystem, generating ideas and promoting innovation in the industry. And for me, the optimum system is in between. Industrial needs to have a minimum R&D level inside their companies, but they need also to have strong relation with the ecosystem. So this is why it's important to maintain dynamic and competent ecosystem, to stay on the edge of the innovation, in order for the industrial to be able to collaborate and to be in a position to select the best ideas in order to promote them and to invest on them.
I think also as well that we have a very important role in terms of training the next generation of scientists, of industry stakeholder as well.
Of course, training the next generation, and a lot of them will become also employees of the industrial. So it's also good to prepare, because the training by R&D, it's an excellent way to train people. So you are developing, you are accumulating ideas, accumulating innovations, and you are developing your team. So it's a very win-win and very beautiful system.
One question in terms of what your thoughts are, what can Manitoba businesses and research community learn from the collaborative models that exist in Europe or in other parts of North America? What can we learn from those?
So I am not expert of the Manitoba business research community, but what is good in Europe is there are different initiatives of networks developed locally in order to close the gap between these two worlds, the academic and the industrial world. And the better are the connection, the more regular are the contacts, the smoother will be the transition. Because in fact, what is key is to trust what we call the Death Valley between the proof of concept, which is done in a lab, and the industrial development. That's where most of the good ideas are dying because of this missing link. And the ecosystem needs to develop platform. For example, Improve in France was started. It was a common initiative coming from academic world and industrial because of this missing link. And Improve now is supporting more than 500 customers worldwide in order to secure this transition. In fact, Improve is translating the best ideas coming from the academic world and offering them to the industrials. This link is very critical.
Great. Thank you very much. Really appreciated your thoughts on this area. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So I'd like to welcome Gerard Klein-Essink from Bridge to Food, Christine Connolly from Protein Highway, and Chris Anderson from Protein Industries Canada. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys for a moment or two just to tell us a little bit about yourselves and your organization. So maybe we'll start with Chris, please.
Fantastic. Pleasure to be here this morning. My name is Chris Anderson. I am the Chief Technology Officer for Protein Industries Canada. And we're a member-based organization that's really focused on bringing forward collaborative research and innovation to drive commercial outcomes here predominantly in Canada, but we can partner more broadly than Canada. And we have the privilege of delivering some funding on behalf of the federal government to help ease that transition. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Great, thank you. Christina.
Hi, good morning. Thank you all for having me today. I'm excited to be here and have this conversation. So my name is Christina Connolly. I am a Trade Commissioner for Agriculture and Food at the Consulate General of Canada in Minneapolis. I'm also one of the founding members of the Protein Highway, a nonprofit focused on the intersection of government, academia, and industry in the plant protein sector. So looking forward to our conversation. Thanks.
And Gerard.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. Wonderful to be with you in Manitoba. And I'm Gerard Klein-Essink. I'm the founder and CEO of Bridge to Food. And we are for 20 years running communities in plant-based foods and plant proteins across the world, and also building ecosystems in this space. And I'm very happy to be here.
Well, thank you all for joining us. And just for our listeners today, this session is pre-recorded. So if you have any questions, please post them in the chat and they will be answered at the end of the discussion. So we'll maybe jump right in and we'll start with what do you guys think are the key elements to building a collaborative animal and protein research ecosystem? So maybe Christina, we'll start to hear with you what your thoughts on that are.
Sure. Well, I'm a big believer in genuine collaboration, and I try to often take a step back and think about, why did we start this work in the first place? What was our goal? It's not about, which state or province or university is leading a certain initiative. It's about the broader goal of advancing this industry, both in terms of an economic and business development opportunity, as well as a way to help feed the world. And then I think in terms of plant and animal protein, I think we need to be really consistent about our messaging that the solution needs to be both. I'm a big fan of Meatless Mondays and my family eats plant-based, but we're not going to rid the world of animal proteins either, and nor should we. It's an important part of our economy, and it's an important business for a lot of people. And I think too often one tries to demonize the other, and we should instead be lifting each other up, and being honest about our faults, that animals contribute somewhat to climate change and that plant-based has a ways to go in terms of how processed it is. I'm a big fan of speaking the truth, and I think if we did that more often, we would listen to each other better. And as somebody in government, I feel that I can be a neutral party in saying these things, but I would love to see others do it too. So those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's very much about starting a conversation that's two-sided. So thank you, Christina. Chris, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Christina's touched on a really important aspect, and it really comes down to a will to work together, and that comes with a shared vision. And if you can't have a good dialogue to understand what the needs of each party are, it's really hard to drive those, particularly those pre-competitive research opportunities. Plants and animals are always linked in our ecosystem. The outputs of one are inputs to the other system, and so it's really hard to say that one could really thrive without the other. And so byproducts of processing for plant-based proteins become feed for animal production systems. Outputs of animal production systems become inputs to plant protein production systems. I think there's a great opportunity, and that's where we can really see some shared outcomes, I think.
Yeah, and there's great complementarity at certain stages between the two sectors. Gerard, I'll pass.
Yeah, I think to the point of Chris, it's about a shared vision, and it's also about maybe a mission, you could say as well, and then really take time to build trust and to see how you can get there in very small steps. Because very often in the bigger scheme of things, people will always agree that the world needs to turn around rather than stop or be more green. But it's really trying to see, okay, what are then maybe the steps after you've defined the mission to do that, and then take the time for it. And I think diversity is very important. So you see in some countries or situations that it is regional, but even within the regionality, you need diversity because then you have different discussions. I think that's another important point across the value chain or with other fields of research connected to it.
So what do you think are the barriers that are experienced by academic institutions and the research community in collaborating with industry on a protein research ecosystem? And what do you think is required for research institutions to better align their programs with what the market and industry needs are? So maybe Christina, I'll pass that to you.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. And I'm not an academic, but I was involved in the creation of the Plant Protein and Innovation Center at the University of Minnesota, and I'm on their board, so have watched them start from the beginning. And I think what was extremely important from day one was that the dean and assistant dean of the college saw the reason to do work with industry and said straight out, we want to do work that matters to industry. We don't want to do research just to do research. And in that moment, I knew we had something, because that isn't always, I think, voiced. And I think basic research is extremely important for many reasons. But in this space, having the collaboration with industry, I think, requires recognition on the part of the academic institution that industry is going to drive a lot and has a lot to say. And then I think, having ongoing conversations with industry is important, because their needs and demands from consumers change so quickly, much faster than the timeline of a single research project, right? But if there is an ongoing positive relationship, I think it's possible for both sides to be nimble. So I think the more that we can sit down together and talk about our collective needs and challenges, the better suited both will be to kind of continue working together.
And I really like that concept of having an ongoing relationship, and you hit the nail on the head. Often research projects are 1 year, 3 years, 5 years is a long research project, just because of the sources of funding and the cycles of funding. So being able to respond quickly to needs that arise in the industry, but having a long-term vision of what the next cycle will look like. So thank you very much. Gerard.
Yeah, I think to the point of Christina, it's very often you can look at it top down and bottom up, but some successful examples which I have seen, for instance, I'm from the Netherlands in Wageningen, is until 4 years ago, there wasn't a university broad understanding or strategy about what do we want and how does protein fit into the bigger picture. Because the university will do consumer science to breeding and then food processing and nutrition in the middle, a lot of different things. So they said, well, it's part of the investment agenda from us to really bridge between the different researchers and research departments. And that has paid off very, very well for them. And all of a sudden, they are much more on the radar than before, just by a single decision to call it an investment agenda from a strategic point of view at board level, coming to the point of the dean, right? And so there are many deans. The second point, I think, would be to your question on, what are the challenges for researchers? And I think we are still in the old systems of how does industry find maybe an academic partner? And very often you go to the professor, and maybe at the assistant professor. That's where the level is where there's an untapped opportunity for them to be in connection with research. They do the work and they would love to get another project. But then who are these industry people? Where are they? Because they don't go always to a conference, or they don't have the travel budget. So this is where the gap is for actually scaling, I think, and the challenge for them, and where the ecosystem can help to facilitate.
Great. Chris?
Yeah, I think Gerard has hit on a really important point, and it's the visibility of the research community to industry, or vice versa. And so we spent some time last year actually reaching out to industry stakeholders, and that was certainly one of the themes that came up, is some of the difficulty in knowing where to find the expertise that they need. And that's why I think dialogues like this and the summit are so important for starting to build those bridges, particularly in an industry that's growing so rapidly in like our protein space. And so finding the right expertise is certainly challenging. I think another thing that can be challenging is the infrastructure involved, particularly in academic institutions, and for small organizations figuring out how to get a contract written, how to get it consummated or executed, how to set expectations for what they need and what researchers need. It can be a pretty daunting experience, and it can take quite a long time. And I know you mentioned that a 1 year, a 3 or a 5 year research project can seem quite long. A lot of companies are coming in looking for an answer like, could you tell me next week? Yesterday would be better if you could make that happen. And that speaks a little bit to the not necessarily the misalignment, but the assumptions that each party has about what the priorities are and what realistic outcomes are. And so that really comes down to great dialogue between academics and industry partners to make sure everyone understands what can be done, the timelines it can be executed on. Those are some of the challenges that we've certainly seen. And it's been really interesting to advocate for more industry-led research into academia. I think Christina highlighted how important basic research is, and that has to continue. Completely agree. But this interface of, as you move up the TRL level, as you're considering scale up, et cetera, and how to be more responsive in our research institutions to the commercialization needs of industry partners is important space to be mindful of.
And that sort of brings maybe a little bit to my next question in terms of what models do you think are available to enable industry and research to collaborate on projects where IP is involved? Maybe Chris, because you just sort of ended, I'll continue with you.
Well, intellectual property is so important. It's important to academic institutions, but it's critically important to companies, be they small organizations or multinationals. And again, I think it really comes down to engaging in dialogue to understand who is going to own what or have rights or royalty opportunities associated with the work going on. What are the restrictions that might be imposed? And it's important for companies to be able to communicate how they want to run their businesses, because the intellectual property they needs to support that. I think it's challenging for a lot of startups because they might not even know today exactly what they're going to need to monetize, to commercialize some of the research. And so that dialogue before you get started is really important to understand what are the terms in which intellectual property can be accessed. And I think it's important for universities and public research institutions to be mindful of the mechanisms by which they can make intellectual property available, and that doesn't all have to be large upfront payments or pretty restrictive terms with regard to how intellectual property can flow to private industry. And I sense a willingness, an increasing willingness to perhaps be more creative about how some of those license agreements can be structured. For a startup company that has, cash is a critical resource. And if the first thing they have to do is make a major IP milestone payment to just get access to the IP they need, they might stall the progress of their company. And so just thinking about when it makes sense to try and extract some of that value could be really helpful.
Great. Christine, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I think Chris has a lot of great expertise in this space, so I appreciate his comments. I think he touched on this, and Gerard did earlier as well, but forethought and collaboration early on and early buy-in from industry and academics, I think, is essential. And I think that builds trust, right? And that is key to how you might leverage the various IP relationships. I think another model that works is, and it's a little bit of a workaround, I guess, but academic institutions that can have both collaborative pre-competitive research as well as sponsored projects. I think that then gives industry both routes, and sometimes industry wants to collaborate on something big picture, but must do something, in the where their protected IP is available as well. So when it's possible to do both, I think that's the ideal.
Gerard, what your comments?
Yeah, maybe a little learning point, actually, because we're from the land of maybe collaboration and pre-competitive research for a very long period of time. And there has been a very important tipping point. And this is where the universities said, and they sticked to it, that they will not own IP when they start to do pre-competitive research. And until they said that, there was always a battle. And there were hurdles, and it was bitching, or whatever you call it. All sorts of things were happening, and it was all related to trust. And once they decided, okay, it is to your group or to individual companies, we don't own it when we do pre-competitive, all of a sudden there was a smooth road. So anybody that thinks that they can get away with it long term as a university in pre-competitive work, owning the IP, where industry puts money on the table, then I would say, yeah, you might be successful, but not in the long run.
That maybe flows a little bit into my next question in terms of what can Manitoba businesses and research community learn from collaborative models in Europe and North America? And we're lucky to have panelists here today who can really speak to that. So maybe Christina, I'll start with you on that one.
Sure, yeah, and I'm going to turn it a little bit on its head first and say that I have actually referred to Manitoba as an example when speaking with others who are just building their ecosystems because of your focus on animal plus plant-based. I haven't seen that approach very much, and being from Minnesota, we have a similar dichotomy here where both industries are extremely important, and I think in Minnesota or Manitoba you will lose one if you don't take the other along. So I think it's very laudable what Manitoba has done and stuck to. I think from there, the other piece is, thinking about how to reach the rest of the world and taking a broader approach. At the end of the day, if we are trying to sell a protein crop or a processing solution to China, they are not going to be too concerned whether it's from Manitoba or Minnesota or Saskatchewan or Alberta, but North America, right? And so that comes back to the collaboration piece and figuring out when it's appropriate to take that broader perspective, yet recognizing that, of course, we all have our funding coming from different places and we are trying to build our own ecosystems as well, but there are times when it's appropriate to step back and say, we're actually part of this larger North American ecosystem.
Really great points. Chris?
Yeah, I think we talked about it earlier, but trust is such an important aspect of it. And so I would say in my opportunity to travel a bit in this space and in my career previously, different world areas, and I would say Europe in particular, there is an expectation of collaboration that is perhaps more advanced than what we have here in Manitoba in particular, or in Canada in general. And so it's really a frame of mind about how business can get done and how research and interaction with research institutions can happen. And we often, I've made this allusion before, but we're really nice in Canada, but when it comes down to writing the check and putting trust in a contract and a relationship, we put our walls up pretty quick. And I think this industry can really benefit from being leading edge and having some trust and working collaboratively together. Because for us to compete in that global marketplace, as Christina said, we can't do it as a whole bunch of single individual companies. We really need to leverage each other's strengths if we're going to be successful in feeding the world, in competing with other suppliers, and actually in moving the needle forward on research and this amazing world of new products.
And that's just so important, always thinking forward, thinking progressively, but also being adaptable to immediate change. When we see things like severe climate impact, droughts, things like that, how can we adapt or manage that while still achieving our long-term goal is something that I know producers in particular in this part of the world have been really challenged with for the last couple of years. Gerard, you bring a European perspective. Can you comment on this?
Yeah, probably a few things that if there's no grease, that it's just talking, and a bit of money will help. And we've had that situation for 2 years, 2012, 2014. We had a lot of discussion about proteins. We should do something together, etc., etc. But there wasn't a commitment from government to say, okay, this is what we want, and we're going to facilitate. And once that happened, there was all of a sudden a lot more going. So I think with Protein Industries Canada as a prime example, having that in place is a fantastic opportunity. The next level, which we have learned from the Netherlands as an example, is that traditionally it is like a government, a ministry will give money, and then you have to apply for it, right? Now, what will happen is that a lot of money will go to the regular ones, put it this way, which is universities, because there's a line, right? It's pre-competitive research. But what if, and this was a major milestone in the Netherlands, if there is a, call it top institute or a board that will say, okay, you as a government want this in proteins, then we are a group of government, SMEs plus industry and maybe agriculture. And together we are implementing as a group what you want to achieve. And we will then as a group also look at the tools that needs to happen. Is it small SME funding things? Is it for factory investments, right? Or for 2 to 4 year pre-competitive? They helped also to develop the toolbox, but the actually selection of the projects is not done by, you have a program and then of course you have a board and you have the board to do it, but it's institutionalized as we are like a compromise or a collaborative society. Say, well, there's a group that does that, and yeah, the government is there at the table, but they are just making sure that things are done also for their interest because they give the money, but it should be a business interest in the beginning. And that was a major development in terms of getting it across the country. So that's why I think it's fantastic that you focused on proteins and not on animal proteins, because it is both, which is important. And then thinking about, okay, how can I get a top institute, an advisory board or a decision board, right? Then it's linked. Investments are linked to strategies, and that's commitment. Rather than we wait for some new funding, and then, we can win or we can lose, but there's no business connection there.
And funding really is a perennial question across plant, across animals. So, and you guys have alluded to it really well, but kind of came into my next question, but how do we entice private investment for pre-competitive programs, or what are funding partners telling us about joining investing? We know that it's a challenge, and Chris has hit the nail on the head. We're really nice here, and sometimes that can be our downfall in terms of the next step. But what do you guys think are the thoughts or your thoughts about enticing private investment? So maybe Chris, I picked on you, so I'll pick on you again if that's okay.
Well, and it seems appropriate working for Protein Industries Canada to be picked on, but I think Gerard has really hit an important theme, and sometimes you do need an incentive, a catalyst to bring some of this activity together. And if we want commercialization and R&D outcomes that are different than what we've done, what we've had in the past, we have to do it differently. And that is really the emphasis behind how PIC operates as an independent organization delivering programs on behalf of the federal government. And so we have those requirements around collaboration, because it is so important for our future competitiveness to have an industry that is collaborating together. We have been lucky, I think, or quite grateful that we've been able to leverage $173 million of federal funding into over a $400 million portfolio of industry investment into the space. And I think that speaks to organizations' willingness to invest, but in order to invest in the right themes and in the right way, if that's what we want to say going forward, there needs to be a catalyst. There needs to be that seed money or that extra incentive to help get work going in new directions. And Canada's research sector has been very prolific, very productive. What we haven't always done the best job of is turning those innovations, that research, into commercial outcomes. And so having that interface be more industry-led, as Gerard has mentioned, is an important way of bridging from benchtop to real products in the marketplace. So it's been a really interesting opportunity over the last 3 years.
Christina, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree completely that industry-led is the key. And so I'll take the example first of the Plant Protein Innovation Center at the University of Minnesota. it's a membership model. So companies that are members have a seat on a technical committee that decides the research priorities, and then has some buy-in as well on which projects are funded. So that's one model that seems to work. I think also we just need to find ways for the funding to be more nimble. And I think PIC is a great example of that, because it has been always an industry partnership with academia. But I have seen companies, large and small, get frustrated by, wanting to collaborate with government or academia, but the timelines are just so anathema to how they operate. And so then they kind of just give up and look elsewhere, or do their own thing and say, we wish we could work with X, but we need to do this now, not after a 12-month strategic planning period has happened within the state or whatever it might be. So I think it's on governments and academics as well to have a business mindset, whether that means, I always want to say, like, every state Department of Agriculture needs a chief innovation officer, somebody who's thinking in this business mentality all the time, whether it's something like that, or, within the universities. And I think Chris is touching on this. I've seen it so many times in both agriculture, but other industries as well, where there's all this great work coming out, but then those are the academics and they're not sure how to commercialize. And the commercializers are like the big companies, right? And so they're not quite ready for what's in between. And how do you fill that gap? So some universities have, a commercialization entity within, but even those are, specific to one phase. And I think when we're looking at investments and the various stages that a startup has to go through to really launch, there are some missing pieces, or at least pieces that could be really improved upon and expanded. And I think people are having these conversations, but it's kind of hard to know. I think everybody's in their silos. And so we have to figure out what is needed to make kind of bridge that gap.
I think the conversation part is just really so important. Often we are in our silos, so to speak. So I think just really having that company in the background there, being in our having that conversation just ongoing to establish what the mutual expectations and benefits are. Gerard, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, maybe a last addition to what you just said is, I think industry. Sometimes they follow like we would do as consumers as well. We see there's free ice cream and we think, oh, I want a free ice cream as well. So I've looked at the development of the Plant Protein Innovation Center in Minnesota, which is a fantastic example of, a decision to build something together with a smaller group. And then over the course of 2 years, people are joining that as well. And of course, but they also think from a unity perspective, well, it should be good because these are there already, right? So then you get something which is growing, and all of a sudden, they're also going to be, they think, oh, there's trust, so I should also be able to work with these people, and we do this already together. But I think another very important thing next to the industry kind of government type of strategy, you really need to have a research strategy, because if the quality is not there, then you will get the people on board for some time with some money, but later on they will just say, well, it's not good enough. So really understand what are the hotspots in your research ecosystem or in your research world. You can't do the whole sector from consumers to breeding. That's not realistic. If you are in Manitoba, or maybe even in another province, or even not in the Netherlands where we have a lot of information. So you are depending on great professors that do very special things, or teams, right? And do not then underestimate to put a lot of money there. So I think the beauty of Protein Industries Canada is, and that's very unique. Nowhere around the world it's been done like PIC has done in a magnificent way. By getting the money and spending it for the majority with industry. I think I'm fair to say, Chris, right, that maybe out of the whole 142 million, it's not a majority or 50% goes to universities, right? It's more of industry working together to really help them to scale, which is a very new and novel model. And then, but in 4 years' time, you will also need maybe to build those cornerstones on the future for the research in breeding something, and then that you can't do with industry. They have to wait, and you have to have the pre-competitive or the really, pre-competitive research in place. So it's a dual strategy, I would say.
So we just have a few minutes left, and maybe I'll just go around the table and ask you, we're in an exciting time of protein innovation and protein research. What do you think are the biggest opportunities going forward to develop a research system around animal and plant protein in Manitoba? So maybe Chris, I'll leave it to you just for your closing thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the biggest opportunity is to put aside our traditional silos and actually work together for benefits, for mutual benefit. And I think if I use some of our own projects as examples, the idea where multiple companies and academic institutions can work together to solve problems that have benefit for all of the participants in the project. And if we can keep this momentum going, I think Manitoba has done a great job. The province has done a great job of bringing to the table stakeholders that would traditionally be perhaps not adversarial, but certainly not necessarily aligned on the priorities. And having that dialogue and moving that forward, I think that collaboration could be one of the biggest opportunities we have.
Gerard?
Yeah, I'm a strong believer of kind of numbers in terms of putting your number where your mouth is. So I think the beauty is that you've brought a lot of people together, and if you can stretch it to 2030 and link the ideas and the unity that you have to a longer term goal. It's not about plant-based or on animal protein, right? It's that you both have for society, for the world, an obligation in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals. And then say, okay, if this is the massive change that needs to happen or will happen, because consumers make choices, right, or business make choices, then what do we really need by item to accelerate? And that's a budget. And if you don't have a budget somehow, and very often I think governments are, and researchers even as well, are scared to put a budget behind something that they think is necessary. But if you're able to do that, all of a sudden it becomes something that makes logic to make it into smaller pieces. Okay, well then, if that's what we like, and beyond the next government, right? You could say, well, we had a vision for a longer term future than for 4 years. And that kind of moonshot stuff is possible. And I think in the end, if you are able to get industry aligned on that, because sometimes they think really longer term, if they have to solve all the problems, will help. And it takes it out of the budget what it is today, because it takes time for people in governments to think different. But if you don't give them the vision about how the difference could be, you will be working on a half-year or 1 year strategy.
Yeah, but that inspiration going forward. And maybe Christina, we'll leave it to you to close it up for today.
No pressure, right? I think I would go back to just the idea of always remembering to take a step back and remember the goal that was what got you started. Too often, I think, if you're a company, you're focused on your bottom line. If you're a government, you're focused on your KPI or your fiscal year budget. But I think every company was started because somebody had a vision, right? And it wasn't just to make money. It was to create something that solved a problem, and you feel strongly about it. And I think it's important that we see each other that way too, that we see companies for what they started as, and we see government as, I've been in government my whole career. I feel that I'm a true civil servant. I really want to be of service. And then how do we message that to one another and to the consumer? Because to Gerard's point, the consumer will drive everything if they want to, right? Like, they are the ones that have the buying power. So it's our job to educate and explain how we are meeting those sustainable development goals, explain how we are actually working together rather than against each other, because it's too easy for somebody who's, not in government to say all sorts of things about why government is bad and regulation and funding. And every industry can do that to the other. But I think when the consumer sees collaboration and again, sort of like a genuine vision, I think there's a lot of opportunity to do good. And this industry is so young still that we have that opportunity to message in a way that is productive and successful.
Well, thank you all so much. I think we've had a great conversation this morning, and again, it's such an exciting area to be working in. So with that, I will thank you all very much for giving your time and your thoughts today, and we will open it up to questions from anybody that's in the audience.